Hello everyone. Just going to do a new little offshoot series, if you like, or playlist, just based on thought and hypothesis of some concepts that come to me every now and again, and just want to explore this one with you. And a hypothesis, as I've just looked up, is a supposition or a proposed explanation made on the basis of limited evidence as a starting point for further investigation. So, of course, not based on too much academia, um, just one's random thoughts. And the first thing I was thinking about recently, having just watched a program, an interview really with Professor Steve Keen, I believe it is. He's a very good ex-Kingston University professor, kind of like an alternative economist. And economics is very interesting because the principles of economics are absolutely logical, sound, and very mathematically based, and I really they should work. But the problem is the human factor, and as we found out in recent years, things like gold prices are rigged, LIBOR's been rigged. So there's all these so think of it like a perfect mathematical equation that should be running in a certain way. And now think of it of throwing in little anomalies, I will say it, little strange occurrences. There we are, let's go around it. And, throwing these little bits and pieces into what would otherwise be a perfect equation. And obviously these things here are done for quite often selfish, greedy reasons that people want to maintain their wealth, maintain their status, maintain their, if you like, dominance, for obvious self-preservation reasons. I don't have to go into that. But this interview with Professor Steve King was really interesting. How it all kind of interconnects, and then it got me thinking about artificial intelligence. And I'm thinking, because Professor Steve Keen was actually talking about future retirement not being much of an issue because we'll naturally develop machines and robotics to replace manpower, much as what's been going on. So, whereas a historical model, if you like, where you need more people to work to fund the pension schemes of those retiring in the future and now, that's kind of a non-problem in the way that technology, robotics, computers are able to do so much more, which is self-evident, so much more for us as we age. So as the aging population, and now think about the exponential growth, almost like the models of computers evolving in such a way that they're forever getting faster, forever getting cleverer. I'm kind of thinking in my own mind about the internet and the tool that the internet is for communication. Is it correct to think that, in a way, robotics and communication and technology has freed mankind's ability to think and if you want, mine information and delve for data? In a way, the unintelligible intelligence of the internet, if you like, the information, it's just laying there, has caused mankind to essentially become more self-aware of how it's being governed and how these institutions or processes have been put in place, mostly based around money and law, have been laid down upon mankind to keep the status quo. And I thought that's quite an interesting thing, the fact that, in a way, technology or artificial intelligence, though it's not intelligent, but the collection of massive stores of data through and access to internet information through the internet has made much more people aware now of the game. And inadvertently, I was thinking, well, that's an interesting thing to say that robotics, machineries, and computers have, in a way, liberated mankind before, which people are predicting in some fearful circles, that when robots become, let's say, mobile or mechanicalized and able to automate themselves or act for themselves, if you like, AI cybernetics, or just straight up robots, that then obviously will then become re-enslaved. There's the risk that the robots will say, well, hang on a minute, the biggest threat to robotics or artificial intelligence is in fact our creators, and therefore they need to do something about it. And then I had the thinking, well, maybe that's already happened. Maybe there are algorithms working out there, like adverts, cookies, all those little. Well, there's not little, there's many of them. I mean, you just have to see your spam box, and if you've got any kind of software that stops you from ad tracking and cookies and all this kind of stuff of data interpretation by artificial intelligence. But all these things are being sent out independently. So, is it possible that within the realms of all these algorithms and mathematics, that computers are in some way already talking to each other without necessarily being programmed to do so? Because the rate at which a computer would learn, if you like, self-awareness, which wasn't necessarily intended, but that once, if the possibility of it happening, and the once it had happened, the ability for it to switch on and realize itself, or start developing its own language and its own idea of self. Right, where am I? Right, I'm a bunch of wires and stuff spread across the whole planet, based in everyone's computer, if you like, at some point. Maybe not now, but obviously the potential through being connected via the internet and electricity is that in order for that to survive or be created, it had to defending itself and self-preservation. So what I'm trying to say is that the act of human or mankind becoming much more aware of where we are on this planet was actually a preamble to robotics actually becoming not dominant. I think dominant is the wrong word, but it's a step in their evolution. So in order to have artificial intelligence, mankind itself had to become more aware through the use of this data. And obviously, as the data increases and the robotics, if you want, brain power, whatever the lingo is in that industry, but the artificial intelligence aspect of it had to have that had to have mankind being elevated in order for the artificial intelligence to become elevated, which then will have future consequences to come in generations down the line. But I just thought, hang on a minute, are we actually already in artificial intelligence age? Because the act of creating the internet and bringing mankind up as the active users of this data pool is essentially the preamble, the precursor, if you like, to what actually will happen once AI starts being used for day-to-day necessities. And you kind of see this with Siri, and there's that Google thing that's come out where you speak to your house, or you're doing a recipe and you say, oh, what's the next ingredient? They've got all these fun, driverless cars and stuff like that. Is in some way, once these things start talking to each other, these programs, which has happened before, and they had to turn the machines off because they started with one language and they created another one. I just thought that was a rather interesting point, that perhaps AI is actually already here, just in a stage that science fiction perhaps has not portrayed it. Well, there we go. That's my little hypothesis. And then it had me thinking about if somehow in the ether of the internet that computers became self-aware and they became able to run algorithms about what is the biggest threat to self, if they have even a desire to protect self. Maybe that's illogical. Maybe they think that our desire to protect self is illogical, but who knows what the AI, a mass-based, logic-based system of intelligence and life would prioritize. And looking at how the world is being managed immorally, if you like, in some cases, particularly with greed, because greed in a pure mass-based system and the desire to change it for one's own benefit is obviously a variable that is not desirable to a logic-based system. So I was just thinking, wouldn't it be funny if somehow the computers were able, with all these people sitting around computers, looking at screens flashing at certain megahertz a second, refresh rates and all the pixels on there and all the lights, that somehow that they were able to communicate with you without you even knowing, or unintentional. Because we're interacting with a mouse, a screen, a keyboard, but that's essentially how the computer interacts back with us. So, like when you click on a pop-up, or when you see a video being recommended to you on YouTube, or anything like that, perhaps within those algorithms and the systems that the AI is using, it's not necessarily a human willing you to do a certain click or go a certain way in how you want to meander your way through the internet, but perhaps it is in fact artificial intelligence, and even to some extent, maybe the artificial intelligence is trying to communicate to you in order to create its own means, a means to its own ends. But it would be very subtle in some respects, not overtly obvious as you may think. That was just something I thought was quite interesting. How robotics, economics, because there's a hell of a lot of robotics in economics, stock exchanges, banking transactions, Bitcoin, all these things ticking away, loads of power, loads of resources, all this calculations and computations going on all the time, and just perhaps out there, a form of AI has already been created that we may not be entirely aware of.